Well, we're here in Nebraska. We're overlooking the bottoms here. So I'm here with my buddy Doug. Doug's a seed customer of mine and has been using Tecumate for a few years now.
Yep, this will be year 3.
Year 3. So how did you end up getting started using Tecumate products?
We're fighting a lot of sandy soil from residual silt and stuff left over from a 2011 flood. Left a lot of water on our ground, really changed the topography of all of our farms, and it changed our soil, and what we were used to doing just wasn't working anymore. We couldn't get it to do what we were used to it doing. And I have a friend in South Texas that owns a commercial hunting operation, and I spent some time with him, and he told me, you know, your soils are a lot like mine, and this is what's been working for us. I think you ought to give it a loop. So he gave me your information, and we reached out and we did a couple of test plots over some of our smaller stuff, and we had a really good response to it, and our deer wanted to be there again like they used to be.
Yep.
And
so because you went with the lab to start out with, and then
the first year we just did some greenfield and some monster mix.
Yep.
And we planted it through some of the existing stuff that was just kind of fair, and then we fertilized it and we took care of it. Very little soil preparation. It was hard to get equipment around. We were just surviving from that flood, so it was kind of less than desirable. We planted a lot of it with a drone. A lot of it didn't get any attention other than just getting seed on the ground. And it got my deer to come back and start doing what they were doing again. We were getting them to daytime in there and
started getting back to their normal patterns.
Then the second year we went all in with Tecumate. We planted a lot of Lab Plus. The one plot was about 6.5 acres, and we planted all through standing beans.
Yep.
And we had a deer show up on one of our smaller plots on his way to that destination early in the year. We knew he was something special. You know, he had a lot going on, a lot of points, a lot of big mass, and we had him feeding in about a half acre of your guys' clover, and that's where he would hang out until it got dark enough that he felt safe enough to move out to the destination food source, which was the Lab Plus, planted through a soybean field.
Okay.
You know, and that's where they wanted to be. And we had him daytiming through the beginning of the season. Couldn't get the wind right. Slid in there on the first north wind and put an arrow through him. It took about 40 minutes to get him shot after watching him for 7 months. You know?
Yeah.
So he was a pretty special deer.
Yeah, and this isn't just any small deer. What did he tape out to?
His green score, I had a couple of different ones, and everybody was really kind of hesitant to put a hard number on it because he just had so much going on. He was 26 scoreable points. He's only 14.5 inches wide, and he averages 7.5 inches of mass all the way out. He's a mainframe 154-inch 6x5 with 40 inches of trash. And he finished out at 198 and 6/8.
Right there, pushing that 200 mark.
Couldn't give me that last little bit to put me in the club,
Yeah.
but we'll grow another one.
Absolutely. And being down here, we're turkey hunting this week, and the whole terrain is totally different than I'm used to and what most people are used to in the Midwest. So it's basically open ag fields with a few brush spots here and there. So how do you hunt these deer with bows? They're bow hunting. You would think that you have to hunt this with a rifle, but they're bow hunting. So
we're hardcore bow hunters, and I kind of cut my teeth on this bottom ground down here, and everything's just flat. But what we have is we have a series of drainage ditches that navigate the extra water through. This is 4.5 square miles. There's some federal ground scattered out in there, but we control everything else that borders it. And what we, after year after year after year of putting up ground blinds and hunting the trees that we had, because I mean,
there's not many.
I have very few trees. I started just hunting pivot roads and the shoulders of these drainage ditches and the intersections of these drainage ditches.
Yep.
And early September, and I figured out I could get close to these deer on the ground. So for the last 6 years, I have not sat in a tree stand, and I have not sat in a ground blind. We use the rows of corn, we embed our food plots in the corn, and we navigate it through the pivot roads because everything's irrigated, and we have roads to all these pivots, and the deer want to use them.
Yep, for sure. So you're just tucking back there in the corn on the ground, catching them probably less than 15 yards?
I shot that 200-incher. I shot him at about 6.5 yards.
6.5 yards.
Yep. From the ground, no blind, no nothing. We're just in the corn catching them. And they're very predictable. You know, there's a lot of flat ground for them to get lost in down here.
Yeah.
Once the corn's up,
kind of directs them.
They leave all the fed ground alone, and they want to be in them fields.
Yep.
You know.
So we have the blockade product this year, which is, we kind of designed it for a screening. Has like Egyptian wheat, sorghum Sudan, super thick, super tall. And Doug here, he's gonna try something a little new with it. So kind of talk about what we're gonna do with the blockade there.
Well, I've got a chunk of ground down here. It's about, well, this particular farm's about 500 acres. And we don't have any place for these deer to live on our ground on this particular farm, but it's a beautiful farm. The deer want to be there, but it's usually a nocturnal farm because it's open.
That's just, yeah, the food's there.
You can see a long ways. So what we're going to do is we turned in under 12 acres up against the refuge, and we're going to plant a solid block of 12 acres of blockade, and we're hoping that we can get these deer to maybe use this as a bedding area, not so much as a fence.
Yep.
And
just kind of extending their bedroom area out onto your property.
Yep. And that there's 56 acres of that farm that we call the sanctuary. We just don't go under any conditions. I don't shed hunt it. We don't nothing. That was the first time that we've been in there in 4 years.
Really?
Just to turn it over and prepare the soil. Because after the flood, we would just let it be, and we're getting a little bit of willow growth and some weeds and stuff, and it's starting to thicken up a little bit. But we're trying to expedite that, you know, because I can't tell you how many times I've seen Boone and Crockett deer come to the edge of that farm, and it's just not dark enough for them to come.
Pop out.
And they'll either lay down or they'll stand there until it's dark.
Yep. So we're going to do 12 acres of blockade, maybe go through, mow a couple trails through there.
Trails through it. And then we're going to embed some food plots adjacent to that, about 70 or 80 yards embedded in the corn right on the river.
Yep.
And maybe, you know, hopefully we can get them to, even if they don't live in the blockade, if we can get them feeling comfortable enough to use it before it gets dark.
Yep.
You know, and that's what it took down there on that big deer last year. Was we gave him a scenario where he felt really good. We boxed everything in. The widest part of that whole scenario was like 11 feet, you know, and they just he felt safe.
Yep.
You know, he summered there. He didn't have any friends. He ran every other buck that was using that out of there. Once he showed up, he was the only deer there. So it works. And I really, really put a lot of my faith in that lab because this deer that we killed, I'm very familiar with him. He's been on the farm for quite some time.
Yeah,
but he's always been a 6x5 with just a little, I don't know if you want to call it a second beam, or he's got a hook coming off of one of his bases. And we've watched that grow, but he's never just really exploded. And then we watched him summer in that clover and feeding that lab all late summer, early fall, and boy, I mean,
then
he was
46 inches of trash.
He was stacking on the inches, you know. And the gentleman that plugged me in with you guys, his name's Daniel Brock. He owns Four Amigos Ranch down in South Texas, and he said the same thing. He said not only does it produce the tonnage to keep them coming, that's what happens here. My deer density is usually pretty high. I got a lot of federal ground down there where I'm feeding their deer too. So once it becomes, the fields all turn, the beans are no longer desirable to them, you know, everything's kind of browning up, they'll usually eat me out of house and home. But that lab, it put down the tonnage to keep them there.
Tonnage and high protein tonnage.
And high protein.
Yep.
And I think that's why we grew the antlers.
Yep, absolutely. You know? Well, I appreciate you letting me come turkey hunt. It's a beautiful property, and really enjoyed my time out here. So I look forward to seeing how the food plots and everything play out this year. And
get your bow and come back in September, and you can hunt some of them food plots.
That sounds good.
You know?
All right. Well, I appreciate it, Doug.
No problem. It's a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
You know.
If you liked this episode and want to follow along on our hunts, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you know when we post, and you can check out more of the Tecumate life.